Shalom, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah, and this week's parashah is the fourth parashah of the book of Bereshit, also called Genesis. And this week's parashah is called Vayera, which means and appeared. And in this week's parashah, we start this back in Bereshit or Genesis 18:1 all the way through 22:24. And the half Torah is in Beit Melech or 2 Kings 4:1 through 37. And my message for 2023-24 is called Never As It Seems. So in this week's parashah, we start off with this visitation of the messengers of Yodewaheh, and it's kind of funny because it's kind of not clear in the text. You know, it's three men appeared, you know, but then it's also Yodewaheh. So then the question is it Yodewaheh and three men? I think it's Yodewaheh and two other witnesses. There's some differing ideas on who that is, who were the two people with him. But what we see is instantly there's this hospitality given, and then we get into this idea that Sarah is going to have a child. And we get to the point about the laughter. And she says she didn't laugh. And then the angels say, yes, you did. And then we get this first contrast between the earthly thoughts, right? Is anything impossible for Yodewaheh? The question is that, you know, of course, Sarah's older, Abraham's older, and you know, it might be silly. It might be silly to think about having a child at that late stage, and it seems what I would say is unnatural. So it would seem that this goes beyond there. And my guess is that that's probably on purpose, because if it was a natural, sometimes we don't believe. We don't believe things. I mean, people still try and make videos about, oh, well, here's the 10 plagues, and here's how we could explain them all in a natural way, that it maybe wasn't a miracle. Maybe the Sea of Suv or the Sea of Reeds, there's this spot where there's just, you know, it's only like ankle-high water, and, you know, they just walked across there, even though that goes against most of the narrative. But what you see is there's always our view, our earthly view, and then there's the heavenly view. And in this particular case with Abraham, what you got this promise, which was outside of the earthly normal timing and situation for having a child. You had an older woman, an older couple, and they were beyond the years of having children, most likely. I think there's some variables there that we can't take into account because the age variables, right? They lived longer lives at that point still, so then you have to stretch out and say, okay, well, what are the ages we think of now, where we maybe live 70 years? What if they lived 120 years or 200 years, or depending on what it was? You have to factor that in and recalculate and say, okay, how far off was this? But I think the thing is that you have this natural, you had the situation where maybe there was no new life. And obviously Avraham, this was his thing about Eleazar, Eleazar, which is, you know, a servant was going to be his heir, and he didn't have an heir. And then when you add that to the fact that they were beyond the years having a child, so then hope was probably gone that they would have any children and have an heir. And when you understand children, you also understand that that is a continuation of life. So you're going to die, and that bloodline that you would pass on to your son is now, you know, that, you know, when it says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, that is in the fifth commandment, honor your father and mother that your days may be long upon the land which I give you. So we have this relationship with children and their parents being tied to longevity of life on multiple levels. And so the son, Banah, in Hebrew, it's a builder of the name, is the one that carries on and hopefully does the will of the Father. And if he's doing the will of the Father, then even though the father had died, he's literally, in his DNA and in his will, is carrying on, right, into that son and into that son. And so if you look at the totality of that bloodline, it's the continuation of life, right? And so that's an important distinction to make. Now, when we look at heavenly versus earthly, what we see is that earthly thinking is always a little bit off. Things are not quite as they seem. And you see this all the way through this week's Parashat. You see this idea of, here's their idea that having a child is probably not realistic or whatever it is. They laughed. God can do anything. And God has a different view and a different path. And God's path doesn't necessarily align up with what looks logical and what seems likely to us. And so that's the first observation, is these heavenly versus earthly things. And you'll see it throughout the scriptures. You'll see it throughout this Torah portion. You have you have Lot trying to offer up his daughters in the situation with Sodom and Gomorrah. And here's another thing where it's like, okay, I mean, that seemed like kind of a weird thing. Is like, here, take my daughters, to protect these guys. It's like, here, how about take nobody, right? Like, don't feed the evil mob that's outside, and ultimately gets pulled back into the house. And they're struck with blindness, which is also an interesting thing. So we have struck with blindness that they can't find the door. And of course, we know that Mashiach says, I am the door, none come to the Father but through me. So there's double meanings, at least double meanings, if not triple meanings, behind these things when he's here at this wicked place, retrieving the righteous out of this wicked place, which is a bigger model of our life and the planet here and Judgment Day. And what we're doing here in the womb is to select the good son, to bring the wicked out, or not the wicked, I'm sorry, to bring the righteous out from the wicked. And we see even this in Avraham asking, okay, if there's 50, if there's 30, if there's 10, right? Surely, right, you're not going to kill the righteous with the wicked. You're not going to let them both have the same punishment. So there's got to be, again, the underarching theme here is there's got to be a separation. There's got to be a difference between the righteous and the wicked, right? And ultimately, the righteous are saved, right? Avraham is given a son, which is new life. That's even a submodel of being saved. And then you have Lot being saved out of Sodom and Gomorrah from the wickedness. And then you get into even the situation with, we have this very difficult kind of story with Lot and his daughters and the Moavim, which means of my father, where his daughters lay with their father to preserve his seed because they thought they're the only ones left alive. And again, in the earthly view, we're like, okay, this seems off, and would even theoretically be a violation. We have Torah laws that come later about any kind of weird relations like that. But yet, on the other side, you see it and you understand that the greater cause there, what seems off in a normal situation, just like Sarah having a child when she's old, none of this is how it seems. And so even there was two things that weren't as they were seen. Number one, they might have thought that it was the end of all life, as fire and brimstone are raining down and they're fleeing. And that wasn't actually the case. That might be what they thought. Number two, you have the situation where they got their father drunk, and so the idea there is that he's not going to be aware. So there's this separation of this awareness and this reality. This awareness and this reality. And all of those things go to this similar repeating pattern throughout this week's Parashat. And when you take a look over at going down further, you have the same thing. You have the person who was kind, you had the person who was kind when you get into the Haftorah, the Shunammite woman, same thing. okay, my son's dead, and then comes back to life. You have all this repeating pattern of here's God's plan. And a lot of times miracles fall into that line where it's beyond what you see. So Avraham was also, we have the Akedah, we have the testing of Avraham to see if he would sacrifice his son. Again, not a thing that in the natural world is almost goes exactly opposite of the natural patterns, what seems normal. But then when you see, we get this constant contrast that God's plan, right, actually ends up being a blessing. We can't always see that with our earthly minds. We can't see the bigger plan. We don't see everything. We think we have an idea, and one of the great things about Avraham is that he obeyed, right from the beginning, to leave his kindred, his country, and his household, right? To go where? He didn't know. We don't know where you're going. It didn't say. It wasn't like, hey, I need you to leave here and go over there. It was just, go to the place which I shall show you. And so it's like, okay, going blindly in that sense and just obeying, and the rest figures itself out as it goes. We see that again here with Avraham and with his son. Hey, don't know how it's going to happen, but he believed. And we see that in the New Testament, where it talks about he believed and it was counted to him as righteousness. We get into the book of James, we hear about how his faith is made perfect with his works, right? You see all the way throughout here, and look at, we have another contrast in this week's parashah of the people who didn't believe. So the son-in-laws of Lot, when he told them, get out, the city is going to be destroyed, and it says they thought that he was joking, and they didn't leave. And the next day they died, right? The next day they died because they didn't believe. Because they thought, this sounds out of the ordinary, so therefore we're going to believe what we believe. We're not going to believe the unseen thing that we can't see. And of course that goes back to Parashat Noah, same thing. Where's the flood? Oh, there's going to be a great flood. Why is he building a boat? Because he believes in the unseen Elohim. He believes in the things that Elohim warns about that other people don't see, so they don't believe. And they don't believe until it's too late, right? At the point that fire and brimstone is raining down on Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Then Lot's brother or son-in-laws are killed. All the wicked people are killed, right? And then that ties back in. They're struck with blindness. Blindness is to not be able to see. They can't see things properly. What they're doing is wicked, right? And so you even have Lot's wife looking back, right? And they said, and don't look back. It was a small detail. But again, because she didn't listen to the details coming from the heavenly messengers, right? Because it didn't even say, like, how bad it was going to be. It's like, maybe it's just a suggestion, like, you shouldn't look back or whatever. No, she looked back and died. And I guarantee that Lot then, seeing that happen to his wife, who was actually saved, but then didn't obey, which is another pattern, another model right there. They were saved from destruction, but if they disobeyed, they were destroyed. How does that apply to Israel? Israel was saved by the blood of the Lamb, brought out into the wilderness, but because they wouldn't obey and go and take the promised land, they were then killed. It said 600,000 men, not including women and children, came out of Mitzrayim. And then you have just Caleb and Yahushua saved out of that generation, right, of the spies that went over there. And in the next 40 years, although that's probably about 600,000, that's a lot. People don't really do the math on that. They don't really think about that because they wouldn't obey. But they could all say, well, we were saved by God. Oh, with miracles and signs and wonders. And this idea that, okay, so you made it through this first phase, but if you don't do what's right in the next phase, bad things happen. Okay? So people think, oh, no, That's not going to happen, because as long as you make it out, as long as you're separated from the Mitzrayim and counted as Israel, then it's all over. And I don't think that pattern holds up in the scriptures. It just doesn't. And if you see the same thing here, Avraham, Sarah passed the years of having children, so they could just say, okay, and God says, yep, you're gonna have a son. And nothing is impossible for Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh. So whatever you think, okay, but if you obey, great. Now we have this tier. And it's also funny because you see with Avraham that there's that tier of, if 50, if 40, if 30, right? He's going down why the tiers? Why didn't he just start with 10? And say, hey, 10. Why not 1, right? But we see that there's a progression, right? And in our walk with Elohim, there's a progression as well. It's an ongoing progression, being boiled down to righteousness. And if you see this, it's the same thing. The angels give instructions. Go over this place. We can't destroy it until you're there. And don't look back. So many people, I see this when I talk with people all the time about the scriptures. If they do know the scriptures well enough to quote the scriptures, which a lot of people don't, but they'll quote them, and a lot of times you'll be trying to have a conversation, and they'll start misquoting the scriptures. So you have to go through a mental check when you're quoting the scriptures. You have to say, do I know for a fact this is what it says? Every single word. And then that's how I'll say it. If I'm a little fuzzy on a couple of the words, then I have to disclose that. I think this is what it says, right? That way you disclose to the person, because what you don't want to do is say the Word of God says this thing that it doesn't say, then you're lying about the Word of God. And yes, there's translations and there's different views on things like that, but I think it's just a good personal practice. And people who have a conversation with me may not realize, but that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm saying. A lot of times I'll say, in my opinion, X, Y, Z, right? I'm saying my opinion because that's not something I think that is emphatic. That may be something that, here's what I understand from my studies. At the end of the day, I'm not going to claim it as absolute truth, like many foolish people do. Everything they say, everything they know about the Bible is absolute truth. That should be a warning to you, because that's like a kid thinking they understand the whole world when they barely understand anything. So we have to be humble about the Word of God and how we communicate with it, how we talk about it. But if we go back through here, now we're going to look at the other overarching theme here, which is life versus death versus life in here. So it starts off this contrast, right, of how serious. We're talking about how serious it was, that she didn't listen to this little instruction. Second part of it, there's a multi-part instruction. When I'm talking to people, they're quoting the scriptures, but they're leaving off part, or they're misinterpreting part, or they didn't say it quite right, or they don't remember it quite right. But their feeling is way up here about the meaning. Yeah, I know what I'm trying to say, but I'm going to quote the scriptures and kind of quote it. Maybe I got it right, maybe I don't. Maybe I don't know that I don't have it right. How's your belief for the answer so much greater than your understanding of even the components that you're trying to prove your point with? So you got to study the scriptures. You got to know the scriptures. You got to be able to wrestle with them for years, decades, to get to the point that you can have intelligent conversations. And then you can't fall into the trap when you've done it for decades to think you know stuff, because then it hardens your heart, your humility. It hardens, your mind hardens. You think, oh, I know all these things. I've done hundreds of studies, and now I know stuff. No, you probably don't. Most of the people that I talk to, they act like they know everything, and everything they know perfectly. And I can tell they have just such a small thimble of understanding. They don't know that. And I might be being 100 times more humble, not because I don't understand what's being said, but because I probably understand more than them, and am humble enough to know that whatever I know, there's It could be wrong. There could be 100 layers on top of that, 1,000 layers, right? And then they come in with like 1.5 layers, and they know it like they're ready to. It's the hill to die on for them. So you got to watch out for that, And the fact is, the details matter. So if you're going to quote scriptures, you got to study the scriptures to know it, to know exactly what it says, to know what the words of that sentence mean. If you're not sure how to do that, I created a Bible study system that, I have that, you can see that the binder, I created in a binder. You see it on our website, which I'm working on, by the way. I had to move to a new website because the old website was no longer being supported, the person who designed it. So it took me a long time to build the old one, so now I've rebuilt it. So if you go to levator.com, the parashas are there. The studies aren't up there. There's still a lot of work. It's just me. So I'm trying to get back to creating these messages for you. I'm trying to, I know I've been on and off Facebook, no thanks to, people who were hating and, got me messed up on Facebook. And so they closed my account, and there's no really recourse there. So I had to just start all over and lost a lot of contacts and all this and that. So now, we're back, and, that goes to show you too, that's just, I feel very bad about how, I'm not going to dig into all the situation that happened, but, I had a very active and large account on Facebook, and then somebody didn't like something that I said, and we actually talked about it, and I just said I disagree and this and that, and then pretty sure that they had caused some trouble with me and Facebook to the point that my page got shut down. And the crazy thing is, it's another messianic, so it's like, we don't think, which is a perfect example of this parasha, never as it seems. We're looking at a small earthly view, right? And we're not looking at the bigger picture and the costs, right? So here Avraham thinks, I'm done, I'm old. When I die, all of my inheritance, everything I have, here he is absolutely following God. And, it's going to kind of fizzle out because it's going to go to his servant, and he doesn't have a son. And then God steps in and gives him a son, says, no, actually, look up at the stars. If you can number them, that's what your offspring's going to be, right? Your descendants. Like, that's crazy. And even in here, many times you'll see some setbacks. You see the situation with Hagar and Sarah and Ishmael. You see all of that. But it ultimately wasn't the plan, and the plan got diverted, but it didn't stop the plan. And that's kind of how, I see things here. I was away for a while, and still just working on trying to, keep the lights on and raise my family and do all the things that I'm trying to do, plus trying to bring some videos and teachings, which stopped for probably, 10 years. I mean, I actually was recording a bunch of videos, but then they didn't get out, and so I have a whole backlog, and now I'm getting back into it, and we'll just see how it goes out. But lots changed in the last 10 years. We are always changing. Things are always changing, but life gives us setbacks, and life, crumbles underneath us, and we're pushed over to another area. But really, you have to be resilient, and you have to just go with, if you got to rebuild, then you got to rebuild. But the people who, I was thinking about this the other day, the people who really, and it's tough to say if it's good or it's bad, but man, you got to be careful what you're doing out there to people, because it reminds me of the thing. Now, what if that person never would have caused that trouble, and I would have continued, and there'd have been 10 more years, not only of messages, just hypothetically. But how many of those people that I'll never meet, people consume my content that I've never met? They don't reach out, they don't comment, they don't say, people are like, oh, I love your message. I'm like, I've never even, I don't know who you are. You say you've been watching my messages for years. If that's the case, then all of that, right? When you look at descendants, here he shows them the stars of heaven. That doesn't mean you're going to have, a billion sons. You might have one son who has some sons, who has some sons, and then when you stretch it out over the time, now you're at the billions level. But you may not see all that, and you may not see it in your lifetime. But that one son, right, Yitzhak, very important, right? What if he slips and falls down the hill and dies? He's affecting 1 billion people that aren't going to exist because of that. Now, in the same way, you have to understand the accountability, because we don't see, just like I said in point 1, heavenly versus earthly, we don't see further down the timeline. We don't see how those little actions that we do or don't do impact the entire world, right? So in that case, maybe different people would have saw it. Maybe that would have affected them. Maybe they would have had children that affected them. And now because I'm not there, which I'm not just putting all on this guy, although he had his part, the self-righteous zeal, it's just a lesson for me. I don't care personally, but there's so many life lessons to learn. Don't be so zealous in what you think, right? You're imposing your thoughts. That's what he really wanted to do, is he wanted to impose his thoughts. I'm like, look, if you want to do it, do your thing and operate the way you want to do, then go ahead. But that's not the way I do what I do. And he didn't respect that. And he tried to, again, the Nicolaitans in a way, is always trying to rule over. I see a lot in the Messianics. People trying to, it's like the pastor up front, the preacher, or whatever you want to call him, trying to control, trying to tell everybody who's at the congregation what to do. I've seen young people, who come out and they get in front of the room, and there's gray-haired men, in their congregation just because, they had a building and leased it out. Now it becomes their ministry. And all of a sudden they're trying to tell people twice their age who've been Messianic 5-10 times longer than they have, trying to tell them what they should and shouldn't believe. You got to be very careful about that, because when I come on here, I share my thoughts, my studies. This is what I've found. Ultimately, these videos are actually for my children, so that even if I die, they can go back and watch hundreds and hundreds of hours of me talking about the Torah, explaining things when I'm long gone, and share it to their children that I will never meet. And so that's part of the reason why I make these videos. But the thing is that I've been around in the Messianic community for a while, for a couple of decades. And I can tell you, I've seen people come in, like this guy, he was so zealous. Not the guy who messed up my Facebook channel, but this other guy, he was young, and then he, gets the title of rabbi and all this and that, and it's like, which says nothing to do, but okay, super kind of zealous, right? And later I don't even know if he's Messianic anymore. And yet then he was like, well, you can't, we don't believe these things, and he's pushing people away that have different beliefs than him. Everything has a consequence. Like, people don't understand that you don't have to push people away because they think differently, because nobody thinks like you. I'm just going to let the spoiler alert come out. Nobody thinks like you exactly. If you sat down and talked long enough, you'd find the points where you differentiate, right? Between the two of you. Everybody thinks they go to the congregation and they all think the same. They don't. Either they're just not digging into having enough conversations. They'll find difference of opinions. And that's absolutely okay. When you go out into the field, okay, there's lots of different types of plants. They don't all have to be one type of plant. That's not how God created the earth. He didn't just say we're going to do one color. There's lots of different colors on the spectrum, okay? There's a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different opinions. All of that is okay. And you still have to stay centered on yourself, because it's good to iron sharpens iron, which is good. You need to be listening to others and being around people who don't believe the same way as you do. But then stay in your studies and listen to them. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe they're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe you're both wrong. You have a whole lifetime to wrestle with the Word of God, with the truth, right? Like Yaakov wrestled with the angel. You know, you gotta wrestle all day, all night, and that's what we're doing, you know. So, and when you're wrestling with a friend, right, or even strangers, you're accountable to not hurt that person, to seriously injure that person, and so, you know, that'd be my warning out there to people is that, you know, there's been a lot of people in my life that have done things, and I've probably done that to other people. So, you know, I'm not pointing a finger. That have really changed the course of my life and injured me in ways that are not good, and they'll probably still be accountable for that, and I'll probably be accountable for the times I've done that to somebody. But that's life's lesson. Is a lot of times we don't understand how careful we have to be until somebody else wasn't careful with us, you know. And so that goes into my point, life and death, is that these things, you know, when Lot's wife looked back, that was for her life. When Lot's son-in-laws thought he was joking, that cost them their life, right? Avimelech, right? That almost cost him his life, right? Because something wasn't as it seemed. You see how that repeating theme? He told Sarah to say, "You're my sister." And then God had plagued Abimelech, right? And said, if you don't let this man's wife go, you and all that are yours are dead. So you're playing with your life. And he fairly said, in the innocency of my own heart, right? I have not done anything. And then he asked Avram, why did you do this? This is a terrible thing that you've done. And because he didn't know exactly what was going on. And that goes to the reoccurring theme for Parashat Vayera, is that things are never as they seem. And you, if you understand that, if you walk around with that humility, then you'll understand, like Avraham, that you may not understand God's will in your life or where you're heading, just that you need to head there and you need to obey God. That's a choice. At the core, obedience is a choice. You don't have to know everything. Just like children. They obey their parents. They don't understand the world. They don't understand why their parents are saying the things that they're saying or having them do chores. You know, but it's going to help them later in life when they have a better work ethic. Excuse me. So, things can be life and death. Things that you think are small can be big. And the last thing is that this goes into his timing and our timing. Most of the time, we just don't see the large enough timeline to understand. We don't see all the ways one choice we made turns into, in the next 10 years, what did it affect? In the next 100 years? In the next 1,000 years? But if you start to imagine that, then you're going to start to understand that there is no small choices. All the choices that we make to look back for Lot's wife was a big choice. And it's a big choice. Who would have she come in contact with? What would her timeline have been had she not disobeyed the commandment and looked back? A lot of things could have changed. A lot of people would have been changed, right? But now it's not. And so, you know, things aren't as they seem. We need to realize that things have a bigger picture, realize that we may not always know when we're making choices that we're making. Make sure that the choices, it's more of a reason to be careful about the choices that you make, big and small, because they all do have large outputs and ramifications. You just might not even know what those are in your entire lifetime. But that could be good and that could be bad, right? There's good choices you make, like Avraham to obey. There's bad choices like thinking someone was joking, and then it ended up costing you your life the next day, right? So think about your choices, be aware, be thoughtful, and, you know, try to make good choices, and be careful about the ramifications when you're engaging with other people. Can have a dramatic effect on them. Make sure that it's a positive effect and not a negative effect. Even if it's about the Bible and you're beating people over the head with the Bible or with verses that you don't understand, but you think you understand 100%. That's humility, you know, and humility is going to serve you well. Anyway, that's my message this year. It's called Never As It Seems. If you liked it, please comment, like, and share. Especially that also, I like the feedback. I'm here to engage. I'm here to interact with you. I'm hoping to get back on the horse here and make more videos and share them out in more content, because as I go through, you know, even my old Facebook messages, everyone's like, oh, we missed you. We haven't seen your messages. Well, I'm working on it. All right. So anyway, shalom until next week.